you very much, Chetan. And we move on with our first panel, Next Generation Core, the key to future-proofing banks. So I'd like to call up on stage, please, V. Ramkumar, who is a senior partner at Cedar.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I could see a lot of faces from last evening, and it's a pleasure to be here. I would start with my quick introduction for my fellow panelists here. I would like to call on stage my first panelist, Gene Murphy, CEO of Recognized Bank. As you all know, a digital SME lender and savings bank. Put your hands together. Second panelist for the day, he is a co-founder at SaaScada and NED Centenary Bank, and I have to take away his thunder with his permission. His definition and his tagline in his social media goes as this: changing the world one transaction at a time. I just love it. Steve Rout, welcome on. My third panelist is the Chief Commercial Officer of Engine by Starling, Nick Drewett. A lot to talk about there, Nick. And may I also have on stage the Chief Technology Officer of Kiya.ai, Mr. Oswald Lopes. Os, welcome on stage. So maybe Steve, I'm going to start with you. After that interesting presentation by Chetan, I think there's a lot to talk about what happens since the topic for today's discussion is about next-gen core banking, and we're talking about future-proofing banks. I have to ask you this: what design architecture considerations goes in the design of quote-unquote NextGen Core from your standpoint, and more importantly, what implications does that have for future-proofing of banks in the future?
Thank you for the introduction, and I will charge you for using the one transaction at a time. First and foremost, I'm probably the least technical person here. My co-founder Nelson will tell you that. I've never written a line of software in my life and would never try. But I think one of the challenges that we talk about when we talk about next generation and future-proofing is actually defining what a bank looks like in the future. So I'd like to take just a couple of, 1 minute of defining what I think a bank or a future bank could look like. Now, some of you will agree with some of it, most of you will agree with none of it, I would suggest, but I think it's important to define that when you then look at the technology that banks will require going forward. I pinched this from some of the work that I've done as chair of the Global Alliance on Banking on Values with 60 banks around the world, and also the work we've done at SaaScada, putting in database, cloud banking, core banking systems. And I called it an instinctive bank. What I see as banking in the future is it understands the future of macro trends, unexpected sources of competition, extreme events, which we're all aware of now, emerging risks, and it brings together AI insights, the context and knowledge from its workers and its partners. But I think it has three hallmarks. One is it's broken down internal silos, embraced external partnerships, potentially even including competitors. These organizations will share data, intellectual property, skills, and more for a seamless user experience that benefits the customers. It will harness data and advanced technologies and gain real-time actionable insights and fast accurate prediction capabilities so they can anticipate customer needs and business opportunities. I think also it needs to have an adaptive workforce. The workforce needs to embrace change, adopt new skills and collaboration, and it's aligned around one purpose, the customer. So, taking the Chetan's point at the start, could a bank become multi-local while also being multinational, play an active role in funding a community, creating a halo effect? Could it be a financial knowledge hub? And organisations can build purpose-driven, adaptive workforces to better meet customer needs. Essentially what I'm saying is that if you take that as a dream, as a vision, then the core for new generation banking is about data. It's about that use of data, how you use data. And more importantly, the key is adaptivity, speed, because I see no value for a customer in just one pure transaction. Why am I under open banking? I can choose a number of banks. I can choose a number of different organisations. And that's great. But actually, how do I as a bank then ensure that that customer is maintained by me and retained and becomes a client forever or for a period of time? I think that's the challenge for us as cloud-based banking platform providers, is giving the banks the data so they can use as much as possible their experience, their knowledge and their data to deliver really high quality services. So just to end, I think core banking really should have no customer or as little customer information in as possible to allow the banks themselves to choose through microservices, APIs, the best solutions, whether that be from an ESG point of view, whether that be from a data point of view. You have to have a relevance to your customer, and that must be up to the bank. What the core banking needs to do is do what it does really, really well and really fast, but also the key is to provide data. Every transaction is key, because that gives you more data for that customer. That's what I think we as core banking need to look at, is where the bank of the future should look like.
Wonderful. There was a lot to consume out there, I have to admit.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, we are grateful to that. In fact, you talked about speed, you talked about a lot about data. Core banking should do what it is supposed to and let others do what they are supposed to. That was quite interesting, and I think one of a very important takeaways there is about the dependence on data and what it means for the future. But as we talk about future proofing, and I'm taking this question to Jean, future proofing is not only about speed, right? It's not only about being plugged into the ecosystem, but at some point it's also about the ability to scale. Of course, Steve talked about from being multinational to multi-local. What do you think, Jean? I mean, this is more about as digital platforms become, more ubiquitous, and we actually are looking to look at banks moving to this in this space more and more. And one of the things that we always talk about, the conversation is about how much can the new age core banking platforms let you scale, and that in a way is important for, again, future proofing. So your thoughts?
So I agree. Sorry. I think it's very important. I think one of the things that we're very much keen to do in our bank is leverage our core banking system to allow us to do straight through digital processing. And so again, having an end-to-end customer journey which is digitalized will deliver speed, efficiency, better risk management at the back end from a banking perspective. More, and again, we talked about modularity. The importance to me around modularity is also around scale, because if you have a core module that you can then tweak across multiple product sets, you have multiple opportunities to serve clients, to touch clients, cross-selling opportunities, return business opportunities, etc., and obviously from that very large scale opportunities. So I think core banking enabling much faster digital processing, much more automation in what banks do and how they serve customers, both at the front end and at the back end, is very important in terms of being able to scale, and scale both in terms of volumes but laterally as well across multiple product sets. And I think again, the use of data and the use of automation and increasing levels of digitalization are key to all of that.
Interesting. So you're talking, your definition of scale is not just about volumes, but also about the breadth and dealing with multiple product sets.
Yeah, and I think we're moving into a world of reactive banking, if you like. So, more and more banks are thinking about customers. They're not just thinking, what do I want to do, and you have what I give you. They're thinking, how do we, particularly the new banks, we need to find customers, we need to, differentiate ourselves. So how do we do that? We do that by reacting more to customer needs and putting customers first. And in order to do that, we need to be nimble around the product set, around how we create products, how we think about products. Open banking obviously gives us huge ability to kind of look at a customer's bank kind of cash flows and come up with innovative products that serve their needs. That couldn't be done before. So with the amount of data that you can gather on clients through all of these systems, there's a huge potential to kind of be much more customer centric than banks have traditionally been. And I think that's very transformative in terms of the customer experience in the whole sector.
Fascinating. Should I say not just be reactive, but also recognize the customer? Right.
I'll steal that line from you.
All right, I'll take this question to you, Nick. And I think there was a comment that Jean just made about being end-to-end and being seamless, right? Now, the moment you talk about seamless integration, and I think a lot of this is to do with how you are plugged into the ecosystem, and a lot of that is to do with being how you are designed from an API standpoint, how you are adaptive to the open banking context. And a lot of that obviously becomes a prerequisite also to be innovative, right? So as we talk about future-proofing and we talk about next-gen core banking, I think an area that is always underlined is how you are able to build on partnerships, not necessarily having everything yourself, but being able to get the best of everyone else and be able to plug into it. Your thoughts, I'm sure you have some views on them, being with all your experience there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I'll probably give a slightly unexpected answer. But first, let me give you some context, because certainly listening to Chetan's presentation, we've got our work to do to make ourselves fully felt in the marketplace. So Engine is the single platform that Starling Bank runs on. So the bank runs on one system. So we don't have an ecosystem, we don't have third-party products. We've built everything in-house, cloud native. So we didn't start off like that. We started off with various third-party services in the mix, and for good business reasons, we've progressively got rid of everything. And not for religious reasons. We didn't feel the need to have everything, be able to say we've built everything in-house ourselves, but kind of accidentally, we've ended up building everything ourselves, cloud native, in-house. So we've now got a set of modules that runs the totality of the bank, the ledger, financial crime, all the workflows, treasury, everything.
All of this accidentally, did you say?
Well, in the sense that we stumbled across problems and solved them, and the right solution was usually to build it in-house. So the card process that we used to use didn't meet our requirements for reliability. It kept falling over, it truncated the MasterCard data, and its latency wasn't what we needed. So we decided to build our own. We used to use the third-party call center solution, and we found that by building our own into the workflows, agent productivity went up enormously, and we saved on the license fee. 3D Secure in the card processor, we used to use third-party product that we replaced because it's very expensive. So we've now got our own ecosystem of cloud-native modules. It's proven. The bank runs. We've got 3 million retail customers in the UK and 500,000 business accounts, which is about 9% of the UK market, all running on the production instance. We've also got a development instance with 20 million customers on it. So to the points about scalability and velocity, all these things we can demonstrate. And we can launch products. I love the point about reactivity. I've got a good example. During the pandemic, we issued the ability, something called the connected card, where you could give a card to a neighbour, where they could spend money on a space that you set up in your bank account, and you put a limit on it, so that if you were isolating, your neighbour could buy your groceries for you using your money, which is quite cool. And we did that in 4 days. We couldn't do that without having a nice, modern, fully API'd architecture. So yes, so that's very important to us. So going forward with the engine business, so we're now partnering with banks around the world where we're bringing that same platform, and where banks, as was highlighted, are launching greenfield propositions or new brands with an existing brand, or even replatforming. We're partnering with those banks to where we bring the technology and the experience of building a successful digital bank, and we're providing those modules on a software as a service basis. And yes, the fact that it's all fully API'd, and the banks don't have to take all the modules. If they want to use a different card processor, they can. We can also, and they can build their own mobile apps, talking to our APIs, and construct their own propositions and journeys through configurable APIs. And we can do things like, I'm talking to a large retail organisation in Africa at the moment about adding financial services to what they offer to their customers, and integrating our platform with, say, cash registers, or the ability to provision mobile phones and buy airtime. All of this is possible, or being fully API'd is a hygiene factor.
That's, I think, the very important takeaway for today. Being API enabled is a hygiene factor. And obviously a lot of stuff, you are giving a lot of tech vendors out there a run for their money with what you just said. That's the plan. And you also redefine partnerships. They don't have to be with technology players. It could also be with other banks, which is what you're talking about. But I guess I'm going to taking a leaf from what you just said there, Nick, and there is a whole definition of being able to compartmentalize, or should I use the right phrase, modularize your application, and that becomes a key to a lot of, should I say, services that you render to different segments, and to different products, different services to different segments that you're dealing with, right? That I would take to you, Os, and I think the question here is, the one phrase that we haven't spoken about today is about microservices, right? The more you actually are looking to deliver services, and one of the things that we are seeing increasingly in the design principles being adopted by NextGen Core is being modular and delivering it on microservices. And I know you've actually seen the evolution of these core platforms from the previous generation to what we are seeing now, and I know Kiya has always been on the front foot in driving what could be the future NextGen Core, as they call it. So your take on what it means to have drive modularity, drive microservices, and whatever else that you think are critical principles that needs to go along with that.
Yeah, thanks, Ram. So you're right. I think with us being technology partners, one of the things we've gone through is the whole bit of building the legacy systems to then the low-code, no-code kind of solutions to what is now the composable kind of architecture. And I think from a technology standpoint, the points that were made by Jean about meeting customer demands is not just having a modular and a composable architecture in terms of technology, but microservices, as Nick mentioned, and APIs is something that's a hygiene factor right now. To take it further, I think the banking needs of the future would need something that has an open marketplace. And I think if I extend the concept of the microservices to a micro front end, I think that combined with a combination of a customer journey or a product journey configuration tool allows that much more flexibility in changing the way your product comes across, especially with everything being cloud native. I think in the future you'll have a hybrid cloud, because at the moment everyone's going for the cloud native version, but I think a hybrid cloud with the use of marketplace and then the fintech players coming in with their specific modules, enabling it from the front end right through the back end with a combination of a microservices and a micro front end kind of an architecture is what we're doing. So at Kiya, we're sort of changing from the microservices to even enabling the front end, because the low code, no code gives you the flexibility to a certain extent, but doesn't allow you the flexibility to actually change. And we see that being the way forward, because I think Nick mentioned this, that you go with partners, but then at some point when you want to expand into your product sets or your businesses, you want to expand with scale. And sometimes that expertise does not, you don't have it within your organization. You'd want to go with a partner to go with, and that's an enablement of that kind of a micro level enablement all the way through. And I think in the future with new technology streams coming up, this kind of an architecture will help with digital channels. So we'll see more digital channels enabling. We've seen already the evolvement of the mobile apps, which initially was not thought of. People thought the internet banking and the web banking was good enough. But we'll see more and more of these channels coming up, and if you don't have that in place, you're not ready. So we think that's in the future. You'll need to have that architecture to enable these kind of things, especially from extending the product sets that banks can offer.
Interesting, and that's quite contrarian to where Nick was coming from. So, Nick, do you have a point of view on what he just said?
I mean, look, I'm not sure. I mean,
I'm sorry, I wasn't meaning to put you on the spot, but it was
That's right.
quite contrarian there, so I couldn't resist asking you that.
I mean, what we're saying is, in terms of the modularity of what we offer and composable architectures, I often find myself on panels, people talking about the joys of composable architecture, giving you best of breed, and I kind of get that. I think I've tried to coin the phrase decomposable, partly because it's amusing and memorable, but the point being, what we're offering is a set of modules that do work together because they should. They're all independent. They have their own independent databases. They're all API. So in theory, you can unplug them and use something else. But why would you? Particularly because we built these because the things that were available on the open market didn't meet our requirements. So, and I think shouldn't also forget the shopping list, the bill for license fees that you have to pay for a best of breed composable architecture is extensive and expensive.
Interesting. So cost becomes a critical factor in driving a lot of practical on-the-ground decisions, is what I hear you.
Well, yeah, every bank, when they're building a greenfield digital bank, will have a very careful look at the budget.
Of course, no, I don't disagree at all. I think it is indeed a critical factor, and I can't. I mean, I do empathize where you're coming from. It becomes inevitable that you look at the impact that you drive, especially when you're greenfield and you're starting off fresh. Steve, you had something to say there?
Yeah, I just think you've got to accept that banks are not homogenous. I mean, they serve different client bases, and there are different solutions for different customers. And I think banks themselves have to choose the vision that they want and the services that they need from their core and their partners. And I don't disagree with Nick that there's certain banks would happily do that. There are other banks and non-banks, because as you were saying it, I mean, we're seeing a lot of, I think the phrase now is embedded finance, but the reality is that you can provide core services into different organisations now, and I think you can do it in a way that is more modular. It is more focused on that particular niche, and I think the thing is choice now. I think a lot of banks have a lot of choice. The problem is there's a lot of noise out there as well about who can do what, where, and how. And that's a challenge for any CEO of a bank, I would suggest, is who can deliver what the bank actually fundamentally needs. And for me, that's the challenge that we have got as core providers anyway, is to understand the needs of that bank, and are we solving the problems of that specific bank or that specific entity? Because I used to chair Ecology Building Society. Well, it was quite easy because everything we did was green, very easy. But actually it's not, it's a building society that's very different than Yorkshire Building Society. So in any market there are different needs, and I think there are better choices and there are good choices and there are bad choices, and I think the next generation of core and how we provide those services and how we sell them have to be open about that and accept that we can't deliver everything for every single bank. I think
You can't deliver everything to everybody, but you got to deliver everything to somebody.
absolutely
And
right.
not
Yeah,
something to everybody. So I
solve
think
their
that's
problems.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I guess that's a very powerful statement, right? So you have to be adapting to the specific need of that specific customer, and what you are making as an offer has to be very relevant and obviously impactful. Now, talking about impact, and I'm actually going to take this question to Eugene, and this is probably the same question I'm going to pose all the panelists here as well, right? As we see the future, and as we talk about NextGen Core, and as we talk about future-proofing banks, if there was just one impactful trend that you either foresee or wish for, that NextGen Core banking is going to bring about, what would that be? So I'll give some examples here, right? I mean, it could be on addressing specific stakeholder expectations. Someone talked about, Steve talked about ESG, for example, right? It could be technology, and the trend could actually be about what, if you're talking about, we're having, interesting trends on AI and ML and metaverse and things that could actually be a trend which is a technology trend. It could also be an ecosystem trend that you're actually getting to see as the most impactful. I'm not suggesting that it should be one of these, I'm just giving some examples here. So if you were to say, look, as you foresee, the future, and you're looking at what next-gen core banking can create or should create potential impact, what would that one thing be?
So I'm gonna do a bit of blue sky thinking.
Of course.
I think if we had a world where you had, so we're in kind of corporate land, SMEs, if you had a world where you had personalized banking solutions, I think that would be very powerful. So, I think data can help you do that, because the more data you have about your customers and what they do and how they operate and their cycles and their risks, the more you can find individual solutions for those customers. Now, it doesn't mean if you have 1,000 customers, you have 1,000 products. It may mean that you have 10 products and each of those products are slightly tweaked per customer, or you're more reactive in terms of reaching out to them with financial solutions rather than waiting for them to come to you. And I think both of those aspects are absolutely doable in the future, and that's what we should be shooting for.
Fantastic. As they call it, as hyper-personalization. You actually keep the customer right at the middle and then build everything around it. Lovely. Thank you, Gene. Steve, same question to you.
You should have asked me first, because I was going to choose that one.
I can't repeat hers, but
I'll sort of build on that. Many years ago, when I did my marketing degree, the ultimate aim was segment of one, and at the time that was totally impossible. Whether it's financial services or we are now in that position where I think the segment of one is really important. And when it comes to personalisation, I shared the big issue for many years, and one of the challenges that I see for banks is how you support vulnerable customers in a way that actually supports them rather than treats them as idiots or concerned. What I mean by that, the data you can provide that, Steve Round 6 months ago at the end of the month had £1,000 left in his account after he got paid, or the end of the month. 6 months on, he's only got £100. Is that telling me as a bank that person may be going through some issues? How can I then help that person? And I think that personalisation is where we need to go as banks, because I think the customer is, particularly the vulnerable customer on this case, but maybe the vulnerable SME, and the personalisation is fundamental. That's what I would like to see. And I think we can do that, again, data is required, and how we then communicate that to that customer.
I think that's a reinforced message out there, and I guess a lot of people out there in the audience agree with you. End of the day, I think, as we build more and more on data, it's actually about servicing that customer better and better. Nick, what would your pick be? You can't build on that. No, this is not allowed.
I just want to say I really agree with the financially vulnerable point. I'd love to talk to you about that, but I think there's a lot that can be done to help a worryingly large segment of the UK population. What I would go with instead is carbon footprint. I would love to see more focus and questions asked on the carbon footprint of bank systems. I mean, I remember large banks in the UK needing to run diesel generators outside their data centres because they couldn't suck enough electricity out of the grid. These are banks that talk about not lending to fossil fuel companies whilst consuming an awful lot of electricity themselves. I think if you can get, and it's understandable, these systems date back to the 60s and there's a proliferation of them. Electrons are doing redundant journeys all over the place. We're in the lucky position of having one system. If the monthly cloud bill is a proxy for electricity consumption, it's pretty good. I think when more focus is put on that, there'll be a case, it'll accelerate the case for modernisation and dealing with these legacy systems in a way that's been previously been able to be kicked down the road and left to subsequent generations. I think also there are questions on little things like what language is the there's cloud native and there's cloud native. Different languages. One language can use 8 times the electricity of a different language. So these are important questions.
Fabulous. I think we talked about electron movements and we talked about cloud bills and then we talked about cloud native and cloud native. I think that's a very interesting way to look at things, right? I mean, as we move ahead, I think there's going to be so much emphasis on how well and how efficient you are in adapting to what could be reduced carbon footprint. Os, last words from you.
So I think a combination of what everyone's saying, but I think with Jane's point on the customer-centric part, I think it's the technology to reach to those customers. So I think with technology moving ahead with generative AI and stuff, the channels of having a virtual branch or a bank in a box technology is probably what we see as a trend that we can look at. They call it metaverse, but I don't think it's metaverse. It's just not a virtual, VR kind of a device methodology. But I think it'll be more on those lines, which will allow the a use of the bank's data, and we call it the bank brain, as we call it. So your customer, you learn from your customer using the machine learning models, and you're able to actually reach out to them directly and probably a little bit more personal. So I think those channels seem to be the way what we think is that. So
it's reaching out to the same customer with a hyper-personalized approach, but we're talking about dealing virtually. And how could you have Kiya not talk about metaverse? So I was expecting that from you. But yes, I do agree that, I do see a point where it becomes increasingly virtual, and as Nick was mentioning it, you're also talking about being cloud native there. Being hyper-personalized and keeping the customer in the middle, front and middle of the conversation. Yeah. Lovely. I guess I will take a couple of questions from the audience before we can close this panel. Any questions there? I see a hand go up there. Can someone pass a mic there, please?
I can shout out loud. If
you can introduce yourself as well.
So Bhavik, product director at XYB. I have 2 questions, one for Gene and one for Nick. For Gene, you mentioned scalability and modularity. We're seeing a lot of banks reconciling, trying to bring, because of the, again, carbon footprint point, but we're seeing people actually coming and bringing all the systems together. But do you see the new gen banks distributing further? Do you see them having multiple cores, multiple banking systems to do that? And for Nick, the question on single platform, and having a single platform and not having modularity because of commercial reasons, do you see there's also cost reasons? That if you're selling a non-modular platform, and you wanted to move to a modular platform, would you stop at a point where saying that that's it, I'm not going to go any further modular than this because it doesn't make sense from a cost perspective?
So on the scalability point, I think for us, we probably will end up having to have more than one core banking system because, you know, when you start out, we're not at Starling's level in terms of being able to kind of have the budgets for IT, etc. You need to start with something, and it doesn't always do what you want it to do, and so then you need something else to do something else, and then you need to have pipes around it so it talks to each other, and then you need to have everything communicate with your data platform. So it's maybe a bit clunky, but if it gets you to where you need to get to in terms of delivery and data management and you know, the kind of integrity of what you're doing is sound, then yes, I think you probably, for somebody at our stage of evolution, need something like that. But again, I think, you know, it's interesting listening to the Starling story because obviously nothing is static, so everything has to evolve. Your systems have to evolve, your products will have to evolve. I don't think any bank is in a position where I can say this is our model, yes, and so here is the solution. And if they are saying that, then there's something wrong with what they're doing because everybody has to evolve. So, you know, there's no finite solution to any of this. Everybody has to kind of think about what they need at the time and then hope that that can adapt as you evolve. And there's always stop-starts, there's always pipes and things around it that you need to build probably yourself. So, you know, I don't think there's the right answer to any of this, and you know, everybody kind of goes on their own journey and figures it out as they go along, no?
Yeah, I think you're right. But, so just to clarify something, possibly a misconception, what we haven't built is a cloud-native monolith. You know, everything, you know, we've got a set of modules. It is modular, and that's important. You know, for banks don't want to be wedded to one organisation. Trust is extremely important, which we mustn't forget. I did a reference call. Our client, the chief executive of client 2, did a reference call with chief executive of client 1, and asked her why she'd chosen Engine. And her answer, she talked about 10 minutes and didn't mention a single function, feature, or architectural issue at all. It was all about trust and relationship and competence. And I think, to Jean's point, that's really important. None of these modules are kind of frozen in time. What you're doing is partnering with an organisation that's continually investing and innovating and developing those modules, with the ability to replace those modules with someone else if you want to. And I think that's pretty attractive.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm getting signals that we're running out of time. So I have to bring the curtains down to this wonderful discussion. Thank you again, Jean, Steve, Nick, and Oz. I mean, wonderful conversation. Hopefully there's a lot of takeaways for the audience, and if there are other questions, you can always reach out to the panelists at the next coffee break. Thank you so much.
Thank you.